Alright, let me know if you guys can hear me and stuff. I don't know if the audio is working. I'm assuming it's working. It's working earlier. So, anyone who's in here, let me know if you can hear me and stuff like that. And we'll get started in a few minutes. 5 o'clock. Okay, I'm gonna get started. Give people time to get in. Um, Essentially, what this is a user tier ranking list based on confidence to win a Super Bowl and have success in Madden 22. This is using information and data and history from previous Maddens, as well as just the previous Madden, the preceding Madden, Madden 21. This is a whole new, different vibe and feel to it. From what I've heard, I haven't actually played the game, but obviously it's a whole new Madden, a lot of different things, a lot of different aspects to it. So you couldn't really base the success purely based off of the last Madden, because of the fact that every Madden is its own thing. There's a lot of differences between Maddens, so had to base it off of the totality of someone's body of work and kind of how confident am I in them going into this Madden. and this will determine the team selecting order. The purpose of this is to give everyone kind of little breakdowns and explanations as to why certain people are ranked in certain spots, and there will be minor analysis, and I'll be able to respond and interact with anyone who asks questions or has comments or concerns, anything like that. So we'll get into it here, starting with 32. So we have tiers. There are 6 tiers for this that I didn't really list or say, but the first tier is tier 6. These are teams that I expect to struggle to reach the playoffs, or are just unknown quantities in general, because I don't have that much information on them. So this is the lowest tier, and the first user, Ginger Powder, number 32. This is a lot of this is based off of, because I don't have a ton of information on him. I know he was in the league when I was in the league, maybe once in like Madden 19 or something for a brief period, and then he flamed out. He definitely lost more games than he won, and he didn't really accomplish much of anything, and he wasn't in there for that long. So I know he was in the league a lot potentially before me, and all I can really infer is what has been said about him as opposed to what I've seen myself. Have some one notable strength for him, his general mental warfare. It's more of a psychological advantage. I generally aware that he's fairly good at getting into his opponent's heads and bothering them in that way, and can kind of gain some psychological advantage there. And that's really because I don't know that much about him. That's the only notable strength I can really list, and it's not really a technical strength, more as like a general psychological strength. And then his one notable weakness, I just put consistent gameplay across the board, because the only knowledge I have about him in terms of gameplay was low quality gameplay in like Madden 19, and he flamed out very quickly in the same season that he came in. So that's all I can really give on him for now. But moving on, 31, we have Uptown. Uptown is usually near the bottom of a lot of years. I don't believe I've seen him make the playoffs once, and those kind of reasons play into why he's 31. We have some notable strengths for him. From what I've seen, he's pretty good at developing a solid receiving core and an offense as a whole. He can kind of build one receiver out that's really good, and can kind of build out a whole offense that's fairly decent on paper, not great at executing it. And in general, he makes standard front office decisions and moves. By what I mean by standard is like regular, nothing special, but also doesn't do a lot of things to shoot himself in the foot or like mess up a lot of what his roster looks like, which doesn't seem like a strength on the surface, but this low on the list, with these many guys making potentially poor decisions, hurting their roster constantly, or just lacking a clear vision, having a regular, standard, or average front office is a strength this low. Moving on to his weaknesses, his style of play makes it hard to pull off upsets. What I mean by that is he passes the ball a lot. He's not great at passing the ball traditionally a lot, so he turns the ball over a lot, and he gives his opponents a lot of opportunities to capitalize on his mistakes traditionally, and he doesn't play very good defense usually. So we have bad defense there for weakness, high turnover rate because he passes the ball a lot. He's not great at it, and that those coupled together lead to his style of playing, making it hard to pull off upsets and really winning a lot of games in general. So that's kind of the reasons why I have him at 31. Moving on to number 30. Pep Pearson is relatively new. He joined just last Madden. Didn't get a full Madden season of sample size of him, so can't really give a significant amount of information on his gameplay and stuff like that. But from what I've seen, I did play him one time personally, so I have enough to feel like I had to rank him here. But he could easily exceed this ranking, because we got such a small sample size of him that I do not have a ton of information to base him specifically off of. Some notable strengths for him include, from what I've seen when I played him and when I've seen him play some other people in a few games, he can force you to play at his pace if he starts the game correctly. So he has a lot of very concise, quick passing game that can kind of, and he can play like shorten the game in possessions because he can take long drives. I believe when I played him, it was like a 21-14 game at the end of the game. I didn't beat him particularly bad. It was only a 7-point game because the game was so short, because his possessions were so long. In turn, my possessions kind of turned out to be long, and it was because the game was shortened. It was very close, even though he kind of lacked a lot of talent on that roster. And he has a high completion rate that can give a higher chance of low risk, big plays. So he can complete a high percentage of his passes traditionally, or from what I've seen last Madden, which can lead to a lot of big plays that have little risk in them. So he doesn't throw that many interceptions off of those. Notable weaknesses is he made questionable GM decisions from what I've seen. He had Deshaun Watson on the Jets, and really didn't build anything around him for the time that he had. From what I've seen, he had Deshaun Watson, didn't really do anything to build around him, so didn't really strike me as a quality GM off the bat. He could change that because, again, it wasn't a large sample size, but from what I've seen, that was a pretty big weakness. He had a vanilla defense that was easy to dissect. It was pretty basic defense, wasn't very complex, and it wasn't executed very well. There are vanilla defenses that can work correctly if executed correctly, but it was a very vanilla defense that was easy to move the ball on and dissect. And he puts too much pressure on his passing ability, which leads to costly turnovers in key moments. So he had a decent running game, but he does put too much pressure on high volume passing for himself, which eventually, when you're down late in the game, it's going to lead to a key mistake, and it did a lot for him, and it lost a lot of fairly close games by doing that. So I say he could be higher, but his lack of larger sample size and volume has him at 30. So this is one of the ones where I feel like he could have definitely been higher, but I didn't feel confident putting him higher because his sample size is simply not large enough. 29, we have Wade. Notable strengths for Wade is he has a timing-based offense that can carve you up if you're unable to draw a beat on him that day. Also, his general demeanor and game style allows for surprising upsets. So everyone who's played Wade knows what I'm talking about. He has a handful of plays, 6 to 8 plays traditionally on offense, that if he's clicking that day and if you're playing against him, it's really hard to stop. I've had it myself. He's given other people problems and been able to pull off big upsets like that. And because he has such a humble demeanor, he's more quiet. He keeps more to himself, and he just wants to win and doesn't really get into many confrontations, if at any. You kind of underestimate him, and he pulls off a lot of big upsets that way. He's beaten me that way a few Maddens ago, Madden 18. He's beaten names like Xavier. He's beaten Smoke. He's beaten Key. Just to name a few that he's beaten at some point or another because of the way his timing offense is. And if you're not, like I said, if you're not able to gain a rhythm or anything, if he can gain momentum against you, it's really hard to stop. So that's kind of his significant strength, and he usually carries that over from Madden to Madden if it's working for him. But moving on to his weaknesses, he doesn't adapt, so he kind of sticks with that timing offense and whatever defensive plays he's running, regardless of how bad he's winning or losing or how many games he's winning or losing. He has a handful of plays that are usually easy to figure out for top users or even really many users that are competent, and it leads to a high turnover rate because you kind of can traditionally gain a quick understanding of what he wants to do, and then you can take it away and get it. He turns the ball over a lot, usually top 5-3 sometimes in turnovers because he runs a lot of similar plays and people can stop those and get turnovers off them. And his defense is too simple, so he runs a lot of very, very simple, maybe 1 to 2 plays on defense, and it's not disguised at all, and it isn't executed very well. And he gives up a lot of big plays and big passing games and whatnot off of that. and his front office decisions reflect a lack of a clear vision and plan. So what I mean by this is, for example, last year he had the Panthers. He had Christian McCaffrey. He had just drafted a first-round running back with like 95, 96 speed. And then I believe the next year he drafted another high running back. So he had Christian McCaffrey, the first-round running back, and another first or second-round running back. And that type of stuff is what I'm talking about when I talk about he reflects the front office decisions reflect a clear vision or a lack of a clear vision or plan. He just doesn't stick with building a roster in a certain way. He just invests too much sometimes in one position, or he'll flip on a player too quickly, or he'll trade a player he shouldn't. It's just questionable GM decision after questionable GM decision, and that's been reflected over the course of many Maddens and a lot of really highly questionable decisions front office wise. So moving on to 28, GBNC. Notable strengths for him is he's traditionally a pretty good runner of the football. He is a solid / patient GM, and he traditionally runs a man-heavy scheme defense, which can cause problems. So I know he's usually pretty good at running the football. He has pretty good vision. He's usually pretty good at getting a good running back, developing them, having a decent career with whoever. Solid patient GM. I mean, he won't overextend for moves, or like if he feels like he has to trade a player or right now to get value for him, he can wait. He'll make good quiet moves. For example, last year the Derwin James trade, he wanted to trade Derwin James. I believe he had 1 year left on his contract. He waited it out and got good value for him from Casey as the Colts. I believe he got a good draft capital return, and I think he might have got a player out of it as well. So, things like that. I know many people, including myself, approached him for Joey Bosa, and he just ultimately wouldn't trade him. And it's like those type of smart, patient things that general manager wise that kind of have that as a strength for me. And the man heavy defense is something I usually wouldn't be calling out specific like what you do this given Madden, because like every Madden's different, so people are running different things every Madden. But I remember when I first joined the league in Madden 17, he was running some sort of man-heavy scheme on defense that gave Console with the Dolphins problems. And I remember in Madden 18, he had a similar scheme. When I was the Cowboys, I played him, and he was the Buccaneers in my first playoff game. He ran a man-heavy scheme. I remember in Madden 20, I believe he was the Vikings, which ran a man-heavy scheme, and Beach was the Eagles, and he beat him in the playoffs once or twice with that type of scheme. So just every year he seems to have some sort of man-heavy scheme on defense, at least when he's having success, and he runs it really well and effectively, and it translates well. He figures out a way to get it to work somehow, and that's why I kind of have that as a noble strength. Even if it doesn't translate to this Madden, he usually figures out some sort of way at some point to get some sort of man scheme to work fairly well. Moving on to his notable weaknesses, he struggles to formulate a consistent and effective passing attack. Traditionally, when he can, he has done it in the past, and when he can and when he does, he has made deep runs into the playoffs, but this is a long time ago. Madden 17, Madden 18, he would be in divisional round and conference championship games against myself, against Console. I remember specifically, I don't know if he was in any other ones, but yeah, he was in big playoff games when he can kind of overcome that. But in recent memory, Madden 19 through Madden 21, he has struggled to pass the ball effectively. And because of that, he can't make comebacks of double-digit against quality users. So if he falls behind 10-plus against someone who knows what they're doing, it's almost virtually over at that point. You can turn the game off because he's just been unable to move the ball consistently when he's down. And he can also lose interest quickly if there is no early success. So this is kind of an interesting weakness, one that I didn't really give to many people, if anyone else, because it's more of a psychological weakness. He can give up on the Madden season really early if he's not having early success, and kind of let his roster deteriorate and regress over time because he's not interested as much because he's not winning as much. So that's something that's like kind of a subtle weakness, but it's a big thing, because if he's invested the whole time in wanting to get better, I think he can definitely at least make the playoffs a couple times, but because he gets disinterested so quickly, I could definitely see, that really being the biggest reason as to why he doesn't make any legitimate noise this year. Moving on to 27, Jason. Notable strength for Jason: he is willing to adapt and change game style throughout the course of the Madden season. So he's not great at adapting. He's not phenomenal at it, but he's fine at it. And the willingness to adapt and change throughout the Madden season is definitely a strength, even if you aren't great at it. Because if you're willing to change what you do offensively and defensively instead of just doing the same thing over and over, like we've talked about with other people already, and like we will talk about with some people going forward, gives you the ability to try new things out, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then maybe get a good mix of what works and what works for you, and get rid of the stuff that doesn't work. So that willingness to adapt is an edge over players in this tier for sure. And he traditionally has a patient and safe offense that allows for the potential of huge upsets if run correctly. So I remember specifically this year, I believe he beat Trells because of his heavy safety offense in a regular season game, because of his offense that just moves the ball slowly, doesn't turn the ball over, shortens the game with kind of some possessions, and it's very safe, conservative offense. And if it's run correctly, which, I mean, it is hard to run that correctly in large volumes. If you run that throughout a whole season, it's usually not going to work well for you. But in specific instances, it can allow you to create upsets a lot easier because it doesn't turn the ball over as much. So that's definitely something that I consider mostly a strength. But notable weaknesses: he lacks overall consistency. He doesn't find regular consistency because this scheme that he's running doesn't have any type of consistency to it, because you can't maintain that over the course of a season. It's too difficult for anyone to do. He relies too much on consistent short passes / small gains to generate offense, so which kind of ties into what I'm talking about. So it can be a strength to pull off upsets, but it can also be a weakness in large volume because it's just not there's no consistency to it. You can't be consistent with it. He's also prone to snowballing and spiraling throughout the course of his season. So if he starts off like 0-3, 1-4, 2-5, somewhere in that range, he doesn't ever really pull himself out of that hole. He just kind of spirals and snowballs even worse than what he was, and it's not good because there are some people in here that can start off slow and then pick themselves up from that hole, but he is unable to do that, at least from what I've seen, and that's kind of like a significant weakness in my opinion. So 26, we have Eric versus Fiend. Strengths for him include traditionally a good running game. We all seen it last year with Derrick Henry and the Titans. And I believe the previous Madden, he had the Chiefs and had a good running game with them, was able to kind of involve Patrick Mahomes' legs into that run game. So he always finds a way to be able to use his team to run the ball pretty well. He's not elite at it. He's not great, but he's good at it. And it can be elite if he has an elite player like Derrick Henry, but traditionally a good running game and traditionally a solid defense, kind of sneaky solid defense. A lot of people don't give him enough credit because he does run a pretty decent defense. He can get some stops when he needed. He's played a lot of closer games with me. I feel like I played a handful of close games with him because he can keep the score lower and kind of shorten the game with his run game, and also kind of play some good defense, get me off the field, get me to punt the ball personally. So I'd say a solid defense. Again, not great, but solid. It's definitely a strength. It's not a weakness. And he won't overextend for desperate trades. So he won't, if he feels like he's in a position where he has to trade someone, but like a user is lowballing him and it's the only offer, he won't feel the need to overextend for that desperately. He will wait and be patient with it. which is something that other people won't necessarily do. And that is, in some cases, a strength, and in some cases, it is a weakness, which we'll talk about in a second. Move to weaknesses, he lacks the ability to move the ball through the air consistently, so he can't always pass the ball with regularity. Sometimes he'll have a handful of plays, but it isn't enough of a threat to where people play him and worry about the pass. They usually play him and worry about the run. And then if he beats them passing, then, they'll just shake his hand and say good game, because that's not something they anticipate him doing and he hasn't done it with any regularity or consistency. He's also too willing to let players go in free agency without getting value for them. I remember last year specifically, he had a trade on the table to trade a player that he wanted to trade for a first-round pick for a second-round pick, and the alternative to not doing that trade would be letting him go to free agency. And he turned down the offer because he wanted the higher pick, but no one was offering that. So he turned down the second-round pick and just let his guy go to free agency. So that's the flip side of the won't overextend for desperate trades, is being too stubborn and not wanting to trade. And that ties in with refusing to trade in certain situations, even if the trade benefits his team. So he won't trade with certain players, even if it's the best trade for him, just because it's a certain team or user. So that stubbornness and that unwillingness to make your team better regardless of who you're trading with has hurt him in terms of improving and bolstering his roster to fit his strengths in the past. And that is something that has usually persisted throughout the course of Madden's. So moving on to number 25, I believe this is the start of Tier 5, which all these people in users in Tier 5 I expect to make the playoffs at least once, as opposed to Tier 6, where were the users that I expected to struggle to make the playoffs and maybe never reach it in this Madden. So number 25, I have Swag. I don't think he really played last year very much, if at all. And the last time I remember him being like a true threat to where he could win his division every year and make the playoffs was Madden 18. So and I feel confident enough in him to where I could put him in this tier to where he could make the playoffs at least one time. And he's usually adaptable enough to be able to do that. Talk about notable strengths. He's fairly consistent and he's a sneaky good GM. So he makes really sneaky good moves that are under the radar moves because they're not blockbuster deals, but he makes a lot of good little moves to make a really good sneaky good roster, and he always usually does that. And if he gets in a division where I feel like he's close to the best user, if not the best user, then he has a good chance to consistently be able to win that division, which is because of his GM ability, and he can even improve his floor with his GM ability because he can make his team better, which makes him better overall. And he has a high volume of play calling, which makes it hard to predict tendencies. So one thing that he does that a lot of other people here do not do is he calls a high variety of plays on offense and defense. He doesn't stick to his scheme per se. He calls a lot of plays, a ton. I remember playing him in Madden 18 specifically a bunch because we were both in the same conference, and he did. He won his division a lot. I won my division a lot, so we played a lot, usually at least once a year. And he just called a ton of plays, a lot. And he said I remember him saying because he likes to play sim style-esque Madden, which is cool, and it is kind of a strength for him, calling high variety, because it makes it hard to anticipate what he's going to do next because he calls such a wide variety of plays, and you can't draw a beat on what he wants to do. Notable weaknesses for him, because he calls such a high volume of plays, it also, the extreme weakness version of that is it lacks a clear identity. So if he can't get a good scheme going where he feels like he can get a rhythm, he can lack a clear identity for his team, and it can kind of hurt him in the long run because he doesn't have go-to players and go-to plays, which if it gets too extreme and you have too many plays, you can lack a clear identity. And And something that I've seen is more of a psychological disadvantage is he'll use too many internal and external excuses, which enables the lack of improvement. So he'll blame Madden, he'll blame luck of the other person, he'll blame this and that, and that's something that I've seen him do a lot, and it hurts him because instead of blaming all the other things, which is something that we all do, but I've seen him do it a lot, and kind of just shrug it off. If he stopped doing that and kind of took some accountability, he would get better. And if he got better with all these plays that he runs and his high floor as a GM, he's a sneaky good GM, then he could do a lot better. But that psychological disadvantage of kind of just like blaming everything else is not the best thing to have, and I think that is a significant weakness. So moving on to 24, we have Kattenbros, who hasn't really been a significant user in here since Madden 19. But in Madden 19, he did have a huge, a really good year with the Lions, and that team was not good. So the fact that he had that much success with the Lions stuck out to me. I also know that in Madden 20, he had the Bucks and had some decent success. Wasn't as good as with the Lions, but he had some good success with the Bucks in Madden 19 as well. So getting into his strengths, he's good at developing a quality passing attack. I think we all remember in Madden 19 when he had that 6'8" tight end who was just like dominating the league, leading the league in receiving and touchdowns every year. He would have these 300-yard receiving games, 400-yard receiving games, just ridiculous, consistently, like just dominating. It was essentially like a version of Gronk on steroids. It was just kind of unstoppable. And he also had a good receiving core around that to kind of complement it. And also in Madden 20, I remember he was good at. He had, I believe, Mike Evans on the Bucks. He had Julio Jones. He went out and got free agency. I think he had Godwin still. So he had this good little receiving core out there. So he's really good at developing, a dangerous passing attack that is just, it can really give a lot of people problems because it can stretch the field vertically and consistently. And that ties into high-level big play ability. He can just get big plays like crazy. You just get them with regularity. Like, it's insane how many big plays he got because he's good at getting those players that can create those big plays, and he's not afraid to take those shots, which is it can be a weakness to an extent, and which is why he's at number 24, because it's not something that's unstoppable. It's just something that he's really good at and good enough at to where he can do it against a bunch of people, but not everyone. He's underrated at usering on defense. I believe in Madden 19 as well. He had a linebacker, Davis, on the Lions, who he broke like a lot of records with. If you go back and install Madden 19 and look at the records, the career records, the season records, he had a lot of records with that linebacker. And he's never talked about when we talk about the best, like in terms of like using a linebacker or a safety. He's never talked about in that same discussion or conversation as the best user, but I think he should be in there. He just doesn't have the consistency, and he's not around every Madden, so that's why he's kind of not in that conversation. And I guess that makes some sense, but he is underrated, and he's a fairly solid GM. He knows what his strengths are, and he kind of knows how to build his team to fit those strengths, at least offensively. Defensively, he struggles building a roster that fits to his strengths, and we'll get into that with his weaknesses. His defense requires an assortment of high-level players, to run it correctly, which is a weakness because you need all these just great players to run any type of, of a quality defense. It's just too much to rely on because you can't maintain, that many elite players on defense for that long. So it's just like if he doesn't have all those elite players on defense, he just won't have a quality defense, and his defense will just be a weakness for him, and you just can't have that. You got to be able to adapt and change to your defensive personnel, regardless of who you have or what players you have at your disposal at that time. His big play mentality can lead to high turnover numbers, and you'll see this with other people on this list. It's something that persists with a lot of users. Is he just wants to get the big play? He wants to get the big play so bad, and it can lead to him turning the ball over almost as much as he scores, if not more than he scores sometimes. And it just, you can't win consistently that way. If you turn the ball over that much, or at least in big games, you can't win just winning the big play constantly. Like it's too much sometimes. and he's clearly not on the level of high-ranking users, and he's unable to pull off upsets with any regularity. Anytime I remember in Madden 19 or Madden 20, he would go against a top user or a high-level user like Trells or Beige or myself, whoever, Console. It would just be like a decimation. It would be a significant blowout because he didn't have like a real game plan. It was just kind of get a big play and then play some decent defense. And you can't beat the top guys like that. You got to be able to and be willing to take some underneath stuff. Game plan, create a game plan that can attack them specifically and defend them specifically. And he's been unable to do that with any consistency. So moving on to 23. We have Jasim, who is who had a rough year last year with the Rams, disappointing year for sure, but I still have enough confidence in him to say that he'll definitely make the playoffs at least once. He was also in a really tough division with Smoke and Black and himself as the third, and then even for a while, I don't remember who that Seahawks user was, but I remember the Seahawks user being very relevant. So that division as a whole is arguably the best in last Madden. Them or either the AFC West or the NFC West, which was them. So I can't really put the struggles all on him last year because his division was really tough. But still, he did struggle last Madden. But what still sticks out to me is that Madden 19 first year run he had with the Steelers, made it all the way to the AFC Championship game, took me to overtime, and really gave me a run for my money. And that's when he didn't have to really necessarily build his roster out. He just started with a pretty good roster, and he made the most of it. So moving on to notable strengths, he is an above-average passer, he's probably the first person on this list that I can say that of. Everyone that I've named so far, I feel like, is either an average passer or below-average passer or just a bad passer to this point. But he is an above-average passer. He knows how to pass the ball to an extent. He knows how to get a receiving core that he likes. He knows what he likes to look for in receivers. The one thing he kind of does struggle with is getting consistency out of his quarterback. He always wants to switch quarterbacks because, he just doesn't like the way a quarterback does this thing or that thing or whatever, or he blames his quarterback for making his own mistakes, which is something that a lot of people do, but he doesn't, just things like that. But all in all, he is an above-average passer. He's better at pulling off upsets than most other users on this level. In this tier 5, he's better than most of them at pulling off upsets because he doesn't get as intimidated as them against the bigger users. Like I said, he took me to the wire in the AFC Championship game. I believe he beat Key that year in the playoffs. He's beaten people in the playoffs like that in big games. And he's pulled off upsets. I believe he beat Beige before. I'm not sure in the playoffs. I think so. So it's like he's beaten, or at least taken them to the wire in big games. So because he's kind of not intimidated by the bigger names and by the big games, he can pull off some upsets better than most people. And he also he's able to his scheme translates to bigger games if he executes it correctly, which is something you can't say for everyone on this list. And that leads to he's proven the ability to make a deep run if everything's clicking. If everything's going well for him, everything's clicking, he probably has the highest ceiling potentially of anyone that we've named so far because he's proven that when everything's clicking, he can get hot and go on a run, which is not something you can say for everyone else that we've named so far. Notable weaknesses include questionable GM decisions. He made a lot of questionable trades, I think, in general. And last year, he gets into these spurts where he's like he doesn't like the star players that he has right now, so he wants to get a whole new group of star players in there, and I think that hurts your consistency and that hurts your scheme because the players that you had in there do a certain thing well, and then you want to get players that do other things well, and it's like you can't just keep changing things like that. You have to stick with what you're doing, and if you can't do that, then you're just going to keep changing things, and you're never going to get into a rhythm. So that's something that you just can't hope to have with any consistency. It's also easy. It's easy for him to spiral when having a rough season. I remember him constantly just having rough starts, and then he would change his name in the chat to something like his season's over or he's having another rough season. It's like So if you're already thinking like that, you're not going to be able to pull yourself out of that hole. You're just going to keep being stuck in that hole. So that's kind of another psychological disadvantage for somebody else. And he also has an inconsistent defense. So his defense just when it is clicking, it can create some turnovers and some big plays, but it's never really something I thought of like I have to worry about Jassim's defense. It's never something that I thought about. It's definitely more of an offensive oriented user, but when it is clicking, he can make a deep run. But overall, defense is definitely inconsistent, and that also ties into him always wanting to constantly change his roster and lacking continuity with his players. Moving to 22. Chris Greenwood. Notable strengths for him is he can pass the ball, just like Jassim. He's about the same level as Jassim in terms of being able to pass the ball. He's an above-average passer. He's an above-average GM. He does make some questionable decisions, but he's slightly above average in his GM ability. I wouldn't say he's the best GM that we've named thus far, but because of his passing ability coupled with his slightly above average GM ability, has him at 22 because being able to pass the ball is valuable. With being able to make some good GM moves is also valuable. And he usually has a good variety of play calling. It's not as high as like Swag. Swag definitely has one of, if not the highest variety of play calling, but he has enough variety of plays to where you can't just say, okay, I got to take this away, that away, and that away, and then he can't do anything. Because he does do high enough variety of stuff to where you can't just take away 3 or 4 things and be done. Like he will call a lot of stuff, so you can attack a lot of different parts of things. So you'll have to worry about a lot of stuff when you play him, for sure, on offense. Notable weaknesses include a high turnover rate, which is a weakness for a lot of players on here, but definitely felt like I should list this on his weaknesses because he does turn the ball over a lot from what I've seen. He relies too much on splash plays sometimes. So I remember with the Cowboys team he had, I believe, in Madden 20 for a long time. I would remember watching some games with him and Beige a lot, and he would play a close game with Beige, and then when Beige was the Eagles in Madden 20, and then he would just give the game away because he started trying to get big plays, forcing them, and he would turn the ball over and just give Beige the game. And that's something you can't do against the higher level users. Like, you have to be able to hang in the pocket, sit in there, and be able to win those close games. And because he wants those splash plays so much and forces those sometimes, it loses games for him. He's a below average runner. He's never really been a true threat running the ball. No one's really worried about that when you play him usually. And it's never really been something that I thought about when I'm going to play him because he's a high volume passer. He likes to pass the ball a lot. And running the ball isn't something that you usually worry about when you play him. He also has a below average defense traditionally, and gives up a lot of big plays and gives up a lot of yards and touchdowns and points and whatnot. But because of his strengths, I feel like he's ranked this high because of the combination of strengths that he has. He's able to pass the ball, and he's an above average GM. That's something that kind of no one else has really had a true combination of thus far. And the value of those two things is higher than the value of anyone else's strengths to this point. Number 21, we have Rondo. So in SOB, Rondo hasn't done that much, and you might be wondering kind of like why is he ranked this high? Because he did have the Texans last year for a while and didn't really do anything with them. So you might be wondering like, why is he ranked this high? He did nothing with the Texans. He had a bad Texans team. They stayed bad. Didn't make the playoffs. He kept losing. But I remember him from previous Maddens, and maybe not even necessarily in SOB, but in other leagues, when he has a decent team, he can definitely play well with them. We'll get into his strengths first. He has well-rounded gameplay. He's not great at anything, I would say, but he's not terrible at anything. He has no giant holes in his game, and everything is maybe a little hole, but nothing significant to where it's he's definitely got to improve this if he wants to succeed. He just got to improve everything a good amount, and then he's good. He's decent at everything. He's fine at everything. He uses his team's strengths correctly. Last year with the Texans, he didn't have Deshaun Watson. He didn't really have any team strengths. I know he drafted a quarterback. He was trying to develop him. He didn't really have anything around him to develop him. So when he has strengths for his team, he uses the team strengths correctly. He doesn't underutilize or mismanage his team's strengths. He uses them correctly, and he does a good job at usually not playing down to his competition. If he plays a clearly inferior team or clearly inferior user, he usually handles business like 95% of the time. He's not as susceptible to upsets as other players of this tier are. He feels like if he has the better team, if he is the better team, he has the better quarterback or whatever. He feels like he's going to win that game like 9.5 times out of 10, whatever. But moving on to his notable weaknesses, he hasn't proven the ability to hang with the big dogs. When he gets into the biggest games and the biggest moments, even with the correct team around him, he has not shown me that he can make the plays to win the games against like the top guys or even guys that are really high, maybe not even the very top, but really high guys. And because of that, he doesn't have a very high ceiling. So his ceiling is probably like divisional round, a really close divisional round game. That's kind of what I see his ceiling as right now, which is not very high, and like it's a low ceiling compared to some other guys, because like guys like Jasim, and things like that, I can see making it further than that for sure. And whereas him, I just don't know if I could see him getting further than like playing a really good user really tight in a divisional round game. Like, could I see him taking like Trells or Casey or Black to like a close divisional round wire game where it's like it's neck and neck, but then the other team pulls ahead? I can't really see him going any further than that, honestly, at this point. And he doesn't show out in big games. This could go for regular season and playoffs. He usually plays worse slightly or much worse than he does in the regular season or in regular games than he does in big games. He doesn't execute as well, and that's kind of a psychological disadvantage in that he kind of shrinks in big games as opposed to rising up to the big games. So number 20, you have Twan, who in recent Maddens has struggled quite a bit. Used to be a top user, but has fallen off since then. But because he has had so much success in the past, I think number 20 is a fair ranking for him. Talk about notable strengths. He is a good GM. Twan is the best GM of anyone we've named so far, I think. He makes the most consistently smart moves. He knows what he wants to do, traditionally, at least, GM-wise, and then he makes those moves. And he is really good at being able to do that with consistency. If he finds his identity, he can be a top user. So yeah, when he's had his identity in the past, I remember when I initially joined Madden 17, I believe the first Super Bowl that I watched was him as the Falcons against Console with the Dolphins. And when he knew what he wanted with that Falcons team was really good. And he did get beat by Console, I believe, more than once in the Super Bowl that year. Maybe not. I don't know. I know he lost at least one Super Bowl. And but the point is that he found his identity, and then the next year, Madden 18, he made a couple of Super Bowls against me when I was the Cowboys and he was the Patriots. And when he's able to find his gameplay identity, he is a top user. He has proven that. The problem is he has lacked the ability to find it. In the most recent Maddens, last Madden and the Madden before, he's kind of lacked the ability to find an identity, and it has caused him to struggle and kind of underperform to his high ceiling that he could have. He also calls plays through suggestions, which makes it difficult for his opponents to anticipate him. So it's similar to Swag, where Swag will call a high volume of plays. I don't believe he uses suggestions, or from what I've seen, but Swag calls a high volume of plays. Twan will call, definitely not as a high volume of plays as Swag, but he'll call them through suggestions, at least on offense, to where like you don't really know his tendencies because he's going off of the tendencies of the coach suggestions, and he does a really good job at executing usually through that. Like, surprisingly, it is hard to run an offense deep into the playoffs with suggestions because you don't really know all the time what you're going to get, but he's the best I've seen at doing that, and he's been able to call suggestions and have significant success with that. So that's definitely a strength for him. because it makes it hard to figure out what he's going to do, and because it takes pressure off of him in calling plays on offense. Notable weaknesses: he has lacked consistency in recent memory. So Madden 21, Madden 20, he hasn't really had any consistency, and he's been a bad user, really close to a bad user, if not an average user, and as opposed to him being a top user. He has a subpar turnover rate. At least recently, he has had a subpar turnover rate. A lot of these but those two are recent weaknesses that he's shown, and then the bottom one is a weakness that he has shown throughout the course of his career in SOB. He has shrunk in big games. Against console, like I said, he lost in big games. I believe he lost to Trells in big games in Madden 17. I know he lost to me in 2 Super Bowls in Madden 18. And Madden 19, I was in his division. I was the Chargers, he was the Broncos, and he would shrink in a lot of big games that we would play against each other. And he even blew some leads that he had gained in those games as well against me, some pretty significant leads that I remember. So he just shrinks overall in big games, in the biggest games at least. And it's not by a significant margin, but he has been blown out a lot in bigger games, and that is something that I think is a notable weakness for him. Number 19, we have Jace, or Jason Bennett, who was the Jags last year. Maybe getting rated a little higher than most people would expect, because he really only had last year that was a really good year for him. It was really surprising. He might have been the most surprising user last year in terms of like what he did. He's one of them, if not the most surprising one. Notable strengths: I say he's a good passer. He's the first guy I would call like a good passer. I think with Chris Greenwood and Kattenbros, I'd say they're both, they're decent passers, but I'd say he's the first like true like good, I would call a good passer. He's good. And he has a high floor because of that. Because he's such a good passer, I feel. He has a high floor because he can hang in a lot of games with just his passing ability. Even if his defense isn't able to click that game, even if he isn't able to get a run game going, he usually can kind of hang in a lot of games with a lot of users because of his passing. And he's good at knowing what players to keep and what players to ship away. So his trading last year was really good. I would approach him. I remember for a lot of players, he wouldn't trade them. He would want to keep them because he knows the value of them. So it's smart because those were elite players, and he would, I'm assuming, with other people would ask him the same thing, and he kept them throughout the course of the Madden. So he knew what players that were elite enough to where he shouldn't trade them, and he knew what players were expendable enough to be able to be traded and get value for them. And that's something that's super valuable to have as a GM, because if you don't know the difference between an untradeable player and a tradable player, then you wind up trading a lot of players that you shouldn't, and holding on to and paying a lot of players that you shouldn't. But he doesn't do that nearly as much as a lot of other people. He's usually really good with that in terms of front office wise. Notable weaknesses is that he is bad at running. Last year, he struggled to run the ball virtually at all. I remember, like, he would occasionally get a decent run game going, but he's a bad runner. Like, he's in the lower half at running the ball. And because of that, and his defense isn't great, I didn't list his defense anywhere in strengths or weaknesses because I don't see it as a strength or a weakness. It's just kind of there, and depending on his personnel, it can be a strength or a weakness. It's dependent upon his personnel that he has. And because of him being bad at running and his defense being so heavily reliant on personnel, I said he had a low ceiling, which means essentially that best case scenario, he gets to like a divisional round game. I'd say as like similar to like Rondo, like I said. So his ceiling just isn't as high as some other people that I've listed. I just listed Twan, and Twan's ceiling I feel is much higher if Twan clicks and gets things. And he also needs an elite QB to make real noise. He did have Gardner Minshew last year, and made it to some playoff games. And I don't know if he won a playoff game with Gardner Minshew. He might have. But like to be like a true threat to get to like a conference championship game or something of that nature, he needs a truly elite quarterback, which other guys who you will name later, you don't necessarily need that. So this isn't like a huge knock, but even guys who rely on the run more, who maybe aren't even as good of a passer as as him. They don't need an elite quarterback because they don't rely on passing as much. But because he does rely on passing as much, he needs an elite quarterback to make true noise. But yeah, that's for him. Madden 18 or Madden 18, number 18. We have D Hat or Hat at number 18. I believe this is the last user in tier 5, which all these guys, like I said, I expect to make the playoffs at least one time. It could be more than once. But notable strengths for him, I'd say he's a borderline really good GM. So I will say this. I will keep saying this because as we get higher, the GMing gets better. It makes sense. But I'd say he's probably the best GM that I've named so far. It's either him or Twan. But he's really good at knowing how to build out a team. That Bears team that he had last year was just absolutely deadly. The Bills team the year before was really good. I remember him having a really good Patriots team. And I remember him being able to, that Bears team that he had, that was a phenomenal pass rush that he had developed. The linebacking core were studs. The secondary was good. The offense had, they had two really good, fast, elite receivers that kind of consistently stretched the field and got me on plenty of occasions. And that overall team as a whole was just a really well put together roster, and it's a representation of D-Hat's GMing ability. He's a really good GM, and he knows how to assemble a team. So that ties into he knows how to develop players and assemble a quality team. It kind of ties into him being a good GM. If he gets a really fast receiver, he knows how to get the ball to that receiver in enough creative ways. He'll even, force it to him or whatever and throw some interceptions that way. But he knows how to develop those type of players and get them to how good they should be, and get those trait games for them, and then be able to get the trait. And it's something that he did a lot of last year to be able to get a really good team. And if he finds his niche, he can use that to get far. I remember in Madden 20, he was the Bills. Like I said, he had a really good team. He had a really good run game with Travis Etienne. He had a good defense. Ed Oliver, I believe, was like his best player on that defense. He had Tre'Davious White. I'm not sure if he traded him or not, but I feel like he had Tre'Davious White. The point is that one season in that Madden 20 season, he made a really good run in the playoffs. I don't remember who he beat in the wild card round, but he beat. I remember him being a pretty good team in the wild card round, and then he wound up and beat Key in the divisional round of the playoffs in Madden 20, and then played against me in the AFC Championship game. So the fact that if he can find his correct footing and his correct gameplay style for each Madden, he can get to a conference championship game, and he's proven it with this quality roster that he can put together. That puts him very high. His ability to be able to find what he does well and then use that to get far in the playoffs, as well as his borderline really good GMing ability, has him at 18. But then we'll talk about some of his weaknesses. He's kind of been unable to beat top users, specifically in bigger games, but even like in smaller games, his gameplay style prevents him from usually being able to beat top users. He did upset Key, I think, a few times, maybe twice, because they were in the same division. I was in that division as well. They were in the same division, so he got a lot of shots at Key, and I think he did beat him a couple times. But in bigger games, usually he can't beat top users. He did in the one run that I'm talking about to get to the AFC Championship game, but other than that, I can't particularly recall something, a specific instance of him upsetting a top user in a big game. And that's a pretty big knock on him, because that's preventing him from getting to the next level and making a leap. He also has a high turnover rate, like we've talked about with other people. The high turnover rate for him, it really cost him some games. He was in so many games with me last year, like even if not early in the game, because we played at least a full season's worth of games just in SOB against each other, because he was the Bears, I was the Lions, and he was in so many games where they were neck and neck all the way, and he would kind of just give me the game with a late turnover, or it would be close early, and then he would turn the ball over like twice, and the game would be over at that point, because he turned the ball over, that quickly. And also, I'd say his biggest weakness which kind of contributes to his high turnover rate, is he can get too emotional in games, which can make game situations turn from bad to worse. So he can be down 7 and be frustrated that he had just thrown a pick, and then he gets really obviously audibly frustrated when we watch him play the games, and he can just get even more frustrated when he throws another pick, and it just goes downhill from there because he gets so everyone gets emotionally wrapped up, but there are people who are able to shake that off, and then D-Hat seemingly is unable to shake it off sometimes when and this is another psychological disadvantage. We talked about those. He just seems to get too frustrated and angry sometimes when he turns the ball over, or when he gives up a big play that's maybe fluky, or when maybe Madden creates a fluky play with a tip catch or something like that. He can kind of get too hung up on those, and it can kind of hurt him for the rest of the game. So that's kind of, I'd say, his significant weakness. But that's what I have to say about Hat at 18. Number 17, this is the start of Tier 4. I expect everyone in this tier to make the playoffs more than once, so at least twice. I expect everyone in this tier to make the playoffs. And to start off the tier, we have Bug. Last year he had the Bucks, built out a quality Bucks team, knew what he was doing. The roster was really well constructed. His play style fit the Bucks team, so it was a really good mesh because he had built the team correctly. And he just had a bunch of good early success in his SOB career because of that last year. So going into his strengths, his notable strengths include a really good defense. I'd say he is for sure. I'm trying to think of anyone who could potentially have superseded him previously, but for sure, I think so far he is the best defensive user that I would have listed. Last year, I remember specifically a playoff game in which I played him, a divisional round game, which was my first playoff win, in which it was just kind of a defensive slugfest all the way through. And I was kind of able to make some late plays in that game to barely win a defensive struggle game. But, it really gave me a lot of problems. His scheme that he runs is very similar, to Casey's scheme with the Colts. But it's different in enough ways where it's his own thing that he ran. And he also had different personnel, so he was stronger in different areas than Casey's defense was with the Colts. And that ties into he's good at building out a defense that is versatile and can challenge all offenses. So he's able to stop the run, he can stop the pass, and that kept him in some games. I remember with Trells last year as well. He would get down to the wire with Trells in a few games because his defense was able to kind of keep him in, hang him in, and he was able to make enough plays on offense to just be in the game. I remember him sticking with Trells in some regular season games because of that too. He's a pretty solid runner. I don't know if I'd say he's the best runner to this point, but he is a good runner. He's solid. He's decent. And it's his strength on offense is being able to run the ball. He has simple yet effective offensive play calling. So I remember, like I said, I'll keep going back to this probably because it's the biggest thing that sticks out in my brain because it was the biggest game that I remember him being in was this divisional round game against me. He had very simple play calling. He had maybe a stretch dive, a couple pass plays, this touch pass that he had, and it worked really well, and it wasn't really easy to stop. It was tough. He grinded out yards. He's willing to kind of be patient with it, and it was a defensive game because both of our defenses were just good. But that type of simple yet effective play calling can translate to bigger games because it takes the pressure off of the user when you run simple offenses like that, and it can work. It isn't the best because there isn't a lot of counter punching to it, and there isn't a lot of versatility to it, but it can work because it is simple enough that it takes the pressure off in those bigger games, and you can really easily execute them. But moving on to his notable weaknesses, he lacks the ability to challenge the defense while passing the ball. So his passing game wasn't great. It wasn't something you particularly worried about. You worried about it a little bit more than some of the other guys that we talked about that we've listed the weakness of them as. So he had enough of a passing game to where it was there. It was something you had to worry about in situations, But when you're playing him in high volume, you're more so focused on his run game and those quick touch passes or screens rather than a true passing game. And that lack of the ability to pass the ball with regularity or consistency is a weakness because it lowers your offensive ceiling because you can't score as much with a lot of teams that you might have to get a shootout with. He also has a fear of diversifying play calling, making it easier to create a plan of attack to combat his scheme. That's both offensively and defensively. He's stuck in a lot of the same offensive schemes and defensive schemes, which, like I said, did play into certain strengths. But also for me personally, and I feel like for other people in bigger games, it made it easier for me to kind of figure out, okay, this is what I want to do against him in this situation, and this is what I see I can take advantage of in this situation. And then if he gives me this look on offense, I know he's going to do this. And if he gives me this other look, I know he's going to do this. So all that kind of like condensed play calling gives people easier ways to game plan against you. So if he diversifies his play calling a little bit, he strengthens his passing game a little bit, then he will have, taken a couple huge steps toward becoming a very complete and high level user. But so far that's what where I have him, and those are the reasons. At number 17, at the midway point, number 16, we have Ricks at number 16 at the midway point. Last year with the Ravens, definitely had an interesting up and down year. Missed the playoffs a few times. Had a really phenomenal roster, and we'll talk more about that if it becomes relevant going forward. Notable strengths is he's a really good GM. He's the first really good GM, I'd say. I think, like I said, I'm going to keep saying this because as we get higher, the GMing is naturally going to get better because that's a huge reason why players are ranked higher. But he is the best GM that we've listed so far for sure. That Ravens team that he built last year, he already started with a pretty good team, but he turned a pretty good team into an elite team on paper. It was an elite football team on paper. It was stacked from top to bottom. He had ridiculous pieces. That offensive line had multiple superstars. That defense was really good with all those players that he had. He obviously made some smart trades. I remember he traded Marlon Humphrey to the Giants and got Saquon Barkley out of that and made his run game really, really dangerous, just deadly. So those type of moves that he knows what he can get away with doing and what he can't GM-wise enabled him to create this really strong roster that he could formulate and use to his advantage. And it worked really well to his strengths because of the way it was built with Lamar and with Saquon Barkley. And he did get Jalen Ramsey as well. Like it was just a really tough team that he had overall. And probably top 5 roster-wise last Madden in terms of the overall talent that he had. He has great user skills on defense. What I mean by user skills is that him using the linebacker and safety, as well as him improving his defensive personnel by way of his play calling and execution. He is the best defensive user that I've listed so far, as well as the best GM I've listed so far, and that combination has him at 16 mainly. But yeah, he is arguably the best user in terms of like using linebackers and safeties and trying to lurk for picks and stuff. He's arguably the best at doing that of anyone in the league. I think he's in that conversation, if not the best. He's top 3. And he, that really gives problems to the opposing offenses, as well as, his ability to have a total defense that's really good and challenge numerous offenses. And that ties into, high quality blitz pressure packages that he has. He always finds like a handful of pressure packages that he can kind of give different looks in. He can show blitz and drop into coverage. He can show coverage and blitz. And he's really good at racking up sacks and building pass rushers that way against some lower tier guys. And it does struggle against some of the higher tier guys that are better at adjusting and changing. But against the lower tier guys, he's really good at developing pass rushers with those blitz packages. And he really knows how to use them well. And he has a good running game. I don't know if he's the best runner that we've named so far. But he is one of them, and he definitely knows how to run the ball for sure, and it is a true threat. But with Saquon Barkley and Lamar Jackson last year, it was dialed to all the way to 100 because that was dangerous in terms of run game for sure. Notable weaknesses: he struggles to make up ground if he falls behind. He can fall behind by double digits, um, or even more than that, and it's tougher for him to make up ground than it is for other people because of his play style and how he plays. He likes to play a more patient, slow-paced game, so it's harder for him to catch up. And he also lacks true passing skills. He has a few passing. He usually finds enough passing plays to where it is a thing. Like he can pass and move the ball that way. But in terms of like being able to throughout the course of a game, if he falls down early, like 14-0, if he has to pass his way back into the game and kind of like read defenses with regularity, with consistency, as opposed to going to his bread and butter passing plays, it's something that he can't do over a consistent course of a game. And he struggles to adapt offensively. So you can see kind of all of his weaknesses tie in to his lack of offensive prowess, and his passing ability is just not great, and it is something that can be improved upon. I remember in Madden, and it could change. It could vary Madden to Madden for sure because different Maddens are different. So maybe he'll be really good at passing this Madden. But so like in recent memory, these have been his weaknesses passing wise, or Madden wise, have been his passing ability. But I remember, like I was saying, in Madden 17, the game to get me into the league was in another league. I don't even remember what it was or anything. I just remember that I was in the Super Bowl with the Texans, and he had the Cardinals. I don't even remember who his quarterback was. It might have been like Jacoby Brissett or something like that. The point is that like he was throwing like true just dots in that game, so he was just dialed, and he was just able to pass the ball really well. So he has shown the ability to pass the ball in the past, but in recent memory, he has not been able to. And if he can get back to his ability to pass the ball along and couple that with all these other really good traits that he has, he can definitely get higher. But for right now, this is why I have him at 16. Moving on to number 15, you have Raw Dog. My voice cracked a little bit there. Voice number 15. His notable strengths include he's decent at adapting to how each Madden plays. And what I mean by that is, so I go back to my own personal experiences a lot because that's what I have the best memory and recollection of. In Madden 17, he had this Texans team in SOB that I would play against a lot because I was the Jaguars. I joined later that Madden in Madden 17. And he would run a lot of 3-4, hybrid defenses where he could send certain people, he could keep them in coverage, he could drop certain people, and it was just really confusing and hard to play against. And then the next Madden, Madden 18, he ran his offense differently with the Raiders, and he made a couple Super Bowls that way. And then he fell off for a bit in Madden 19 and 20 and really struggled those years. But last year I feel like he got back to some semblance of what he was in the previous Maddens. With the Saints, he kind of completely changed his game. He was able to pass the ball. He had a good balanced offense that could move the ball through the air and the ground. He had a pretty solid defense. He was able to build the team out really well. So he was able to really change and adapt from what he used to do. And it did take him a Madden and a half or so, but he still was able to do it. And that's something that's more than you can say for most users overall, much less behind him. And he's not as intimidated by the big names and big games as others. He does get a little intimidated that I've seen in those bigger games, but it's very subtle, and it is not as existent as it is for other people. You can see clear intimidation is there with a lot of other people that play when they play bigger names in bigger games, but with Raw Dog it isn't there as much. And that ability to kind of play those teams like they are everyone else kind of enables him to be able to hang in a lot of those games and potentially even pull off upsets a lot of times. And he builds a good team through the draft. This is something that I haven't talked about as much with other people, because it's kind of, I've been talking more about general manager stuff and front office moves as opposed to just specific free agency or trading or draft. But he does a really good job at building a team specifically through the draft. He does make trades. He does it that way too, but he hits on a lot of his draft picks. Remember last year he hit on a lot of draft picks with the Saints and really did a good job of building his team out that way. Had a really quality team, and I know he's done that in the past with the Texans and the Raiders, like I discussed in Madden 17 and 18 respectively. But talk about notable weaknesses. He's inconsistent across the board in terms of gameplay. Like I said, he fell off for a bit in Madden 19 and 20. He was not really in the mix as a contender for a while there. And he usually starts slow within the course of a Madden season. He had the Saints this year to start, which was perceived as a higher team, maybe not a top team, but it was close to a top team. And it took him a while to get going and make some playoff runs. And, things like that kind of have held him back. I remember the one exception to this that I can, personally name is in Madden 18. He did make a Super Bowl in the second season with the Raiders, which is impressive. I remember that team was good, though. That was when the Raiders were kind of developing momentum and had that Derek Carr, Amari Cooper, Khalil Mack type of team, and he was able to build off that foundation and quickly propel himself into the Super Bowl, in which he lost to Trent, who's not in here anymore with the Packers. But he still did quickly make a Super Bowl that year, and he was able to kind of shake off the narrative that he starts slow. But other than that, he has started slow in Madden. It's something that has happened that I've seen. Even at his best, he can't seem to win the game. So even when he's had those great seasons, when he's made those Super Bowls, he hasn't won the Super Bowl. And that is a weakness because it's similar to Twan in that he just hasn't won the big games, like the biggest game that you have to win to be known as kind of a legacy player. He's right on the precipice, but he needs that Super Bowl to kind of cement his legacy and put him over the top in that way. But all these things collectively, and his more of his recent success kind of put him slightly over Rick's, because he had more, I feel like, success last year in a tougher conference than Rick's did. So it was kind of neck and neck for me for them. And Raw Dog's recent success kind of slightly put him over Rick's for me. Number 14, I have Cuzzo, who's kind of been a mainstay as the Washington football team for, I don't even remember the last time he was a different team, honestly. It might have been the Lions in Madden 18, something like that. I don't know. It's been a while, but he's basically been the Washington football team for that many Maddens. He's really good at building a team that works to his strengths. So that's something that I noticed for sure that he's done just as well as anybody. And what I mean by that is building maybe not the best team, or maybe even not really a super elite team, but a team that works super well to what he does specifically. He can build a team that can really run the ball really well. It can kind of kill the clock. It can play some decent defense, and it is able to pass the ball when he needs to. He'll have a handful of passing plays, and he'll have these go-to receivers that are just able to make these crazy catches in traffic, and it really gives him the ability to kill clock, and it gives him the ability to beat anyone, which is not something that you can say for everyone. And that ties into the next one. He can beat anyone if he sets the game at his pace. I've seen this. He has beaten top users. I can't remember specific instances, and I can't even necessarily remember playoff instances because I don't know if he's done it. Okay, yeah, I can remember one. Off the top of my head, I know he's beaten Beige in Madden 20. He beat him in the playoffs because he set the game at his pace. He slowed the game down. He ran the ball really well, and he was able to set the game at his tone and his pace that game, and he was able to pull off the upset. So that's something that I don't know if you can say about anyone else prior to him, is that he can literally beat anyone on here if he sets the game at his pace. I don't know if you can say that for anyone else right now. I know it's possible, but I'd say that with confidence with the way he has shown and what he has done up to this point. So that also goes with he's a borderline elite runner. I don't know. I wouldn't call him quite an elite runner, but he's right on the precipice of elite. We haven't named any quote unquote elite runners yet, or elite passers or elite defenders, but he is close to an elite runner. He's not quite there, but he's close. And he traditionally runs a challenging man defensive scheme. Talking about this with GBNC, only Cuzzo's is more consistent, and it is better. It's a better man defensive scheme. Usually, I remember I played him in a wild card round this year, this Madden, a wild card round game. It might have been for one of my Super Bowl runs, maybe not. I don't honestly remember fully. I don't think it was. I think I won that game and then lost to Beige in the divisional round after that. But the point is that I would have this against tight inner man coverage when you have the slot corner on the inside shoulder of the receiver aligned with him prior to the snap. You could pretty much 100% of the time run this out route to this 99 receiver that I had, Javante Cadet, and get it like pretty much 100% of the time because the leverage is there, the route running is there, they have the advantage, and his man coverage, long story short, basically stopped that and got an interception, I believe, pick 6 against it, which was shocking. It was just kind of like a jarring tone-setting interception for a touchdown because it basically gave me an idea. This is how good his man defense is. So this is how much you have to make it a concern to worry about. I knew about it going in, but I didn't know it was that good, and that kind of let me know it was that good. And I know he's given other people trouble and problems with it in the past. Moving on to notable weaknesses for him, he's not a true passer. We talk about this with other people. It doesn't mean he can't pass the ball at all. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have a few pass plays to go to, but it means that if he has to drop back and pass, if he has to be a high volume passer for that game, it's not going to work out for him. He's going to lose. He's probably going to lose that game, and it's not going to work out for him ultimately. And because he's not a true passer, he's too reliant on pace of play. He has to slow the game down. He has to take these long possessions. He has to play good defense in order to win these bigger games, and it's not consistent. You can't do that with regularity. You can't do that with consistency. It's just impossible. And that also all combines together to where he just can't really climb back into games once he falls down because he's not a true passer. And that's ultimately his biggest knock and his biggest weakness. And it is for a lot of people, but that's why it's such a significant strength for players that are higher ranked, because they have the ability to have that counter punch and be able to pass the ball and feel like a true passer and a true threat in that sense. This is the last person in this tier 4, which are people who I expect to make the playoffs more than once, so at least twice. And number 13 is Jay Will. The last person in this tier, the top of tier 4 is Jay Will. Notable strengths include a very smart GM. I don't know if he's the best GM I've named so far because I think some other guys might have the slight edge on him, but I know he's very smart. He might be the slyest, sneakiest, smartest type of GM because he knows what moves to do and what moves to not do. Like, he just knows what he needs to add, and he does it very well. It's definitely a high strength for him. I don't know if he's the best one that we've named so far, but he's just really good at being a GM. He knows what he needs to do. He's also very willing to adapt and change style of play based on, what type of Madden it is. If it's a running Madden, he'll become a running player. If it's a passing Madden, he'll become a passing player. If it's a blitz Madden, he'll blitz a lot. If it's a cover Madden, he'll cover a lot. Things like that. People will be really stubborn and kind of stick to what works for them, but he will be willing to adapt, and he does a good job of adapting to that Madden. And he might be the best person that we've named yet. I think he is at being able to adapt to the specific Madden. And he's done a good job of it overall and has done it pretty consistently. He also can and has pulled off massive upsets in huge games. The one that sticks out in my brain and probably a lot of other people's brains that were around was he was the Saints in Madden 20. Charles had that Cardinals team that was virtually a dynasty, and he beat him in the NFC Championship game, I believe, because of a missed field goal. I don't know if Trells had a freeze, whatever. The point is that he took him down to a field goal, and then Trells missed it for whatever reason. The details are there. I don't know exactly what they were, but he beat Trells, upset Trells in an NFC Championship game, and that's the one that kind of sticks out. Another one that sticks out that's older, so it's harder to probably remember, is in Madden 18. Console had made a return with the Saints, so he hadn't played this full Madden, but he had joined like about halfway through with the Saints, had built out this really good Saints roster, and then he played J. Will, who J. Will was the Vikings that year, and I remember it basically being, I felt like it was personally over, and I was waiting to see who was coming to play me in the NFC Championship game. I was the Cowboys, I was waiting to see if J. Will would win as the Vikings or if Console would win as the Saints. And I was fully expecting Console to win because of the position the game was in. I believe he had like a touchdown lead or maybe like a 6-5 point lead, something like that, to where a touchdown would win the game for J. Will. But I was like, he has like, I think you remember him having like one or no timeouts, and he had to go like a far length of the field. And I remember him just throwing this like phenomenal deep pass that was like it was a clutch play. And J. Will does that a lot, and feel like he is one of the more clutch players in SOB. If he can have a close game, if he knows what he's doing, he can kind of execute in the clutch. And he's done that against me at least a couple times in the regular season, not so much in the playoffs. But, he's definitely shown it more than once, and it's there, and the body of work is there for sure. Some notable weaknesses include lacks significant consistency. He is more consistent than other people that we've named, but he lacks the ability to consistently maintain his status as a playoff team, who will fall out of the playoffs some years, and then some years he'll make it to an NFC Championship game or a divisional round game. So he just lacks the ability to be, and that's what's keeping him out of like kind of the top 10, is the ability to be a consistent threat to win the Super Bowl or anything like that. And he usually at least has one moderate hole or weakness in his game for each given Madden. Last year, it kind of felt like he wasn't a great passer, and that was kind of enough of a weakness, I believe, with that Bengals team to kind of hamper him down, and I believe he never got past the divisional round because of that weakness, and his defense was never that great. So, he usually has some sort of hole. It's not always the same, but he has some sort of hole that separates him from the rest of, the best of the rest. And moving on to number 12, take a drink of water real quick. This is the beginning of Tier 3. These are all these guys in this tier I expect to appear in at least one conference championship for sure. This doesn't mean that I don't believe that they can make more than one or make a Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl. But these are the guys that I expect at the very least will make a conference championship. At the very least. Worst case scenario, they make at least one conference championship. Number 12, I have C-Mart. He had his debut in SOB last Madden. Had a good, I think, show-out year with the Raiders. I think it was moderate. It's very slightly disappointing because I think I personally had expectations for him that he would at least make a Super Bowl. But given what the situation that he was put in was with the Raiders, and given the kind of pieces that he had around him, and it was a condensed SOB, I believe it was only 8 seasons as opposed to 10 or 11. If we went, 2 or 3 more seasons, who's to tell, if he could have maybe made a Super Bowl with a full 10 seasons or 11 seasons. It's very possible that he could have, because that team was good enough. In one of the last years, he made a conference championship against the Broncos and lost in a close game, if I remember correctly. Notable strengths for him include he is a borderline elite defensive user. I'd say him or Ricks are the best defensive user that I've named so far. I feel like just going off of last year, if you talk about just pure user, not talent, I say C-Mart slightly gets the edge over Ricks in terms of defensive user. He is a high-level GM. He's a quality passer, and he can make a Super Bowl run if all falls into place. So GM-wise, I'd say he is probably the best that we've named so far. Like I said, I'm going to keep probably saying that because the higher along we go along the list, the better the GMing gets, and that's like a huge factor when determining who goes where and who ranks where. as well as that, as well as the ability to be a borderline elite defensive user. And I haven't named any, elite defensive users. I don't believe that are elite yet, but he is close. He's on the precipice. He's right there. If he has like a dominant run next season, even or next Madden, this Madden, where he makes the Super Bowl, and it's kind of like with the strength of his defense that he makes the Super Bowl, then I'll feel good in calling him an elite defensive user. That coupled with being a high-level GM and being a quality passer, I'd say he is also the best passer that I've named so far. He can pass the ball. He can play defense really well. He can pass the ball pretty well. He's a good GM. And if all that clicks together and he gets kind of a run game going, along with all that, he can make a Super Bowl run for sure. I can see that. He in a different league in Madden 19, not an SOB, but in a different league, in a league with similar personnel in it, user-wise. He made a Super Bowl with a good Colts team that he had against me and played a close game against me, and I was able to slightly edge him out in that game. But ultimately, the point is I could see him for sure making a Super Bowl run if everything kind of clicks for him. Notable weaknesses include he lacks consistent big play ability. Last year I seen a lot that he relied too much on nickeling and diming down the field and being able to kind of run the ball, and he didn't have that many big plays. His big plays all kind of came from Henry Ruggs, which kind of makes sense, but even those big plays weren't like strikes. They were kind of like slants or posts, with Henry Ruggs' speed ability kind of being able to pull him away from the defense and create those big plays. He's not great against top-level players. He's not bad, but he's not great. And I guess you can ask the question, who is great against top-level players? But those are the guys who win the Super Bowls, are the ones who are great against top-level players. So, I mean, once we get further into this list, we get a little bit more nitpicky with the weaknesses because these guys are better users. So you have to get a little bit more nitpicky with kind of what's separating them from the people who are ahead of them. And he doesn't game plan on offense as well as he does on defense. His game planning on offense, it seems like it's much more of like we're going to trust what we do on offense. I think he was a lot of a suggestion. He used suggestions similar to Twan. I think he might even do it on defense sometimes. He uses like offensive suggestion play calling and defensive suggested play calling. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. But I think that he does ultimately kind of not game plan as well on offense as he does on defense. He just kind of struggles with being able to specifically attack certain defenses. He did a good job attacking Trell's cover 3 because he played him a lot last year. But I mean, like overall, if he plays a variety of different defenses and schemes, he did seem to struggle at times game planning against specific defenses. But yeah, that's why I'm at 12, and he starts off the tier 3. Expect to make at least one conference championship tier. Number 11, you got Chaz, the Patriots user from last year. He definitely had a good Madden, definitely exceeded expectations for sure. He started off with a not very good team and turned them into a Super Bowl contender and took Beach to the wire in a Super Bowl in which they went to overtime. So for sure, a lot of respect from him from that one Madden. But again, it was one Madden in which he had success, which is a big reason why he's number 11 and maybe not higher. If he repeats that same success this Madden, then he would probably be higher on the list. But for right now, because it was one Madden, you kind of have him at number 11. But we'll talk about his notable strengths. This is the first true elite runner I think we can talk about. He can run the ball really well. He can find different creative ways to run the ball really well. He can do it simple. He can do it complexly, with complexity. And that ties into a simple but frustrating and efficient offense. I believe he did. He beat me, I think, last year at least once. I think only once. I think we were even 1-1 against each other. Because we only played in the regular season. But he has this very simple but frustrating offense. He would have maybe like a screen. He would have like one or two true pass plays. He would have a lot of runs, and he would just be able to like kind of just small little paper cuts all the way down the field, and just those runs that just gash you and gash you and gash you. And he got all the way to a Super Bowl with that. And if he wins the coin toss in the Super Bowl, who knows? Maybe he would have won because with the way his offense was rolling, he could have very well won that game. and he has a stout defense. I wouldn't call him an elite defense, but he's very good. I would say he's third of the names that we've ranked so far in terms of defense, behind C-Mart and Ricks in terms of defensive user ability. And he knows how to build a team that fits perfectly to his strengths. We talked about this with Cuzzo, but Chaz is even better with that. I think that he for sure knows that what his strengths are and like how to tailor his strengths to that. I believe he did trade at least one of his running backs last year because he knew he could build another one. And that's like that type of smart, intelligent GMing ability is like what separates the lower level GMs with the higher level ones, or like the mid tier with the higher level ones, because if you know you're going to be able to develop another running back and that's the reason you trade the other running back, that's like like you're betting on yourself. You're that confident in your ability, and you're not having to pay someone. You're getting a cheaper deal in a running back, and that's something that I've done a lot. And I know a lot of other people that are higher ranked do a lot. If you feel you're confident, you can build someone of another position or of the same position that's on a cheaper rookie deal, and you trade the guy that you have now. You get value for him, and you don't have to pay him. And that's something that he did a lot. And he definitely built his team that fit his strengths pretty much perfectly. I think that he has done that the best of anyone we named so far. Maybe not building the best roster. Again, I'd still say Rick's definitely built the best roster of anyone that we've named so far. But I'd say that he built his team that fit him the best. It definitely was the best fit of anyone that we've named so far. Notable weaknesses: he's not great at adapting when he needs to. He's fine at adapting. He did adapt a little bit. If you take away one part of like an RPO or a screen, then he would maybe call a different version of a play or something to give you kind of some different looks. But can he completely kind of flip and change his play style within a game or even within the course of a season? Not really, and he just isn't great at adapting. He's good at it. He's fine at it. Again, like I said, I'm getting a little bit more nitpicky with the weaknesses as we get further in because these guys are already good. So if you get further into the users, it's going to get tougher to find specific weaknesses. So he's just not great at adapting. He's fine at it. And he can rely too much on the run game. He can, not really have much going on offense. He can kind of just keep punting the ball, I've seen, and he'll just kind of stick with the run game, which I guess you can kind of see as that's what I do. I run the ball, so I'm going to stick with it. And I'm going to keep running the ball until it works. But at some point, you got to be able to drop back and just be able to launch the ball, or even vice versa. He can kind of get too hung up on doing a certain thing on defense. And, that's not on here. But, if you get too invested into how you play, you won't be able to adjust as much. And that's kind of all the reasons why I have him at number 11. Number 10, so we got getting into the top 10 now. This is still tier 3, but the top 10 users of SOB, in my perception this year, have a bunch are black. Strengths for him include he is a borderline elite passer. He is the best passer of anyone I've named so far. He's right on the precipice of being elite, if not elite. It really depends on his personnel. If he has the correct personnel, he is an elite passer. If he does not, he is still a good passer, but not elite. He is top 5 offensive GM in SOB. He knows how to, if not top 3, in the way that he can assemble his offense. He can make them dangerous. He can make them be able to run the ball, pass the ball, and move the ball in all these different ways. And it attacks all these different types of defenses. And it's not even that he game plans specifically for certain opponents. His offensive scheme is just that versatile and that good to where it can attack all these different types of defenses that are there. And it's definitely something that I've had problems with to an extent, and I know other people have had problems with. He emphasizes and consistently acquires speed, and I know you can probably say everyone in SOB does that, but the difference is that he consistently acquires the speed, whereas a lot of people will just, will get a high-speed player and not build them, or will just want the high-speed players and and won't utilize them as correctly if they have them, or just won't be able to acquire them. He consistently is able to acquire top speed. He builds them correctly, he develops them correctly, and he utilizes them correctly. He has the speed, he uses it, he develops it, he knows it, like he is a master with speed. He is a top 3 to 5 user, probably top 3 with in terms of just pure like knowing how to use speed, developing it, everything like that. And he also finds new and creative ways to utilize playmakers. He definitely used George Kittle in a lot of creative ways last year. He used his run game very creatively. He just used how to use all his players, and we just used them very well last year offensively. And a lot of these are offensive strengths, but finding new and creative ways to utilize playmakers is something that he also did defensively. And I wouldn't say his defense is necessarily a strength or a weakness, but it kind of depends on his personnel. But he still found creative ways to use his really good defensive players, I think. Notable weaknesses include struggling to adapt when he needs to adapt. That's similar to Chaz, kind of, is that when his scheme isn't working, when what he's doing initially isn't working, can you kind of flip and switch to that? And he hasn't been able to do it as well as guys that are ahead of him. And also, his defense is very aggressive, and it can be, when planned for correctly, it can be taken advantage of. And this is not necessarily putting his weakness as a whole, or his defense as a whole as a weakness, but it is saying that his defense can be too aggressive at times. Sometimes it can be a strength for him, but that he sometimes runs a heavy blitz defense, and if you know what's coming, if you watch the film from the previous week, if you're aware of it, then you can game plan it for it correctly. I did it to him in the NFC Championship game this year. I remember specifically my first Super Bowl run in the NFC Championship game. He came with a heavy blitz type of scheme defensively because it had worked for him to this point, rightfully so. And he kind of just stuck in that blitzed me a lot. And I knew it was coming, and I knew how to take advantage of it, and I did. And that type of stuff, and I know he's done it in the past, and Smoke took advantage of it because he was in his division a lot this year. So when he would blitz Smoke would take advantage of it a lot as well. And, that type of blitz-heavy mentality and that aggressive mentality works against a lot of guys who can't game plan against it. But for people who know how to game plan against it, you can't just run that one aggressive defense. So people will get too many plays and burn you too bad on it. So moving into number 9, moving well in, or at least a little bit into the top 10 now, as opposed to the edge, still in tier 3. We have Mike or White Mike at number 9. Notable strengths for White Mike: he has good overall user skills. He doesn't have any significant holes traditionally, but he does usually have some moderate holes, some decent holes. But he is pretty well-rounded usually. He's, if anything, I can remember usually sometimes his defense kind of struggling a lot, but he usually has that pretty well, like decent, so it's not like a significant weakness. He's really good at figuring out what he's going to decide to be good at for the given Madden, and he gets very good at that thing. So in Madden 19 with the Cardinals, he decided he was going to be really good at passing, and he built Josh Rosen up and was really good with passing. Made it to the first Super Bowl and had some really nice runs with the Cardinals. Built that Cardinals team up to be really good and was able to pass the ball. In Madden 20 with the Raiders, again, kind of decided that he wanted to build up that passing game, that vertical attack, as opposed to more of a well-rounded passing. He wanted to be a vertical attack offense. He built that Laviska Shenault to be like kind of this ridiculous deep threat and made some deep runs with him. And then this past year in Madden 21 with the Dolphins, he decided he wanted to be a running team with Matt Breida, won multiple MVPs with him. Build up another running back, White or whatever his name was, but the point is he decided he was going to run the ball and was able to do that. And also a notable psychological strength is high-level mental warfare. He's elite at being able to get into his opponent's heads and kind of really like make them play worse than they normally would play, or make them play differently than they normally would play if he wasn't talking. But he talks, and it gets into people's heads, and it can really impact games. Whether people want to admit it or not, it does. It impacts games because certain people allow what people say to bother them and impact how they play. And it can certainly impact games in a lot of different ways. Notable weaknesses include he gets complacent very easily. For example, in Madden 19, like I was saying, he made it to the Super Bowl and kind of was like, he used that as kind of like a fallback whenever he would do bad. He's like, well, you saw when I tried, I made it to the Super Bowl, so if I try, I can make it to the Super Bowl every time if I wanted to. So he gets very complacent. He, kind of with regularity says, like, if I get the one Super Bowl, then I'm good. So it's like, even if he does break through and get that one Super Bowl, then I feel like he's not going to be a threat going forward, because he kind of gets really complacent and like he gets really like satisfied with what he has done if it's like one good year, and it kind of hurts him for the totality of Madden. He underestimates opponents too frequently, which can cause for kind of like upsets that shouldn't happen. People that shouldn't beat him do beat him because he underestimates them, and really it's a problem generally because people who, like I said, who shouldn't beat him just beat him because he overlooks them. He doesn't take them seriously. He says it, he'll tell them in their chat, and that's kind of like how his mental warfare can backfire on him, because he can put pressure on himself, basically saying he's going to destroy this person, and then he winds up losing to them. So because he's putting pressure on himself, and then he loses to him, and then you don't look good. But I mean, it works out for him more often than it doesn't. And he can get hung up on one thing for too long. I kind of mean what I mean by that is like in Madden 20 with Laviska Shenault, he got really hung up on that deep ball to Laviska Shenault and those other players he kind of had on that offense, and he never really adapted his game to change that much that Madden. And even last year, he ran the ball a lot. He never really adapted a lot. So once he kind of figures out what he's going to be good at, he doesn't expand his game enough to be super versatile. Or to change that much or evolve that much, and that kind of hurts him going far into Madden, and without that, without the ability to evolve and adapt as well as he should, he kind of is stagnant and stays as good as he gets the first couple seasons and doesn't really get that much better other than personnel wise. Number 8, have Casey. Right above White Mike, still in tier 3. Notable strengths for Casey, I'd say he is a true elite runner, the second elite runner that we've named, and I'd say the best runner that we've named, if not the best runner, period, because he is for sure an elite runner every Madden, regardless of what team he has. He figures out a way to run the ball, and he does it really well. He's an elite defensive user. I don't know if he's the first. I believe he's the first elite defensive user that we named. He is a true elite defensive user, and he's an elite team builder. So those 3 elite traits put him at number 8, because if you're elite at all 3 of those things, you'll be consistently in the playoffs and consistently have a good team and consistently have a high floor. So I think if you're able to have all of those things, then you're just going to be able to be at, where you are, number 8. He can beat anyone in a given game if he breaks his way. So this is an even bigger version of Cuzzo at what I believe it was 14. Casey is at number 8 because he has a better defense and his run game's more dangerous and his pass game's even a little better. So like he's just kind of a better version in all those ways. And if the game breaks his way, he can beat anyone. And he's also less intimidated of big names than most, similar to how I was talking about Raw Dog was. So if he plays a bigger name, he's less intimidated by those bigger names than most people are. He still does get intimidated, but not as much. Also, I'd say that he has, similar to White Mike, he has high-level mental warfare psychologically. He can get into people's heads if he talks, and it makes them play a certain way differently. Sometimes this can backfire on him, and he can, like I said with White Mike, he can kind of talk too much and get into his own head. But this is definitely, for both of them, I'd say it is a psychological strength over their opponents as opposed to a weakness most of the time. Notable weaknesses is he lacks consistent passing ability. We've talked about this with other people already, and I'll continue to talk about it with more people going forward because, although he does have a decent amount of a passing game, and he expanded his passing game a little bit more last Madden than he did in the past, He still lacks true passing ability and prowess to where he can be able to say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to pass the ball this game. He was always kind of just, I'm going to run the ball. I'm going to rely on the run game. And, that works. But, it can only take you so far so often. You can't expect to be able to run the ball with and win multiple Super Bowls by running the ball and playing good defense, because it's reliant on too many factors that are outside your control and that are kind of in Madden's control, and you kind of have to have like a really good roster to be able to do that, and you can't keep all those pieces over all those years. He also sticks and runs with one defense too frequently at times, which allows easier game plans to be formulated against it. So last year, I believe it was the cover 4 defense. In previous years, it's been a cover 2 defense when I initially joined in Madden 17, to where he'll kind of like, all right, this is the defense I want to scheme I want to run, and it's not a weakness. It is a strength because he is an elite defensive user. The only weakness aspect of it is that because he's running this one defense, it is elite, but people know what he's going to run. So you can say, okay, this is how I'm going to attack it, and I've done this personally, to where I know what he's going to run. This is what I can do to attack it. This is what I'm going to do to attack it. And last year, I remember he played heavy man as well last year. He played heavy man coverage last year as well as cover 4, I believe. I remember he had a really good man defense with that Colts team, and it did give a lot of people issues. And he had a really deep secondary. So, but ultimately, because he sticks to that defense so much against everyone and doesn't kind of like change or mix it up or throw some curveballs as much, people like myself and other people who are higher can game plan really well against it and know what they're going to do against it before they play him, and really put a tough game plan together that's going to make it difficult for him to do whatever he wants to do defensively. But moving on, number 7, have TJ. This is top of tier 3. After this, it's another tier. But we have TJ here at number 7. Notable strengths for TJ: he has elite big playability and offense. He usually has an elite offense, like pretty in total. Like he's not an elite runner, but he's a great runner. He's pretty much an elite passer, although he turns the ball over a lot. And he has elite big playability for sure. Running the ball, passing the ball, however you want to move the ball, he has elite big playability, arguably the best elite big playability in SOB, if not definitively the best big playability in SOB, one of them. He's an elite team builder. He knows how to build this team. So him and Casey are the two guys I'd say are elite team builders to this point. And I'd say what separates TJ and Casey is that TJ kind of, his elite big playability takes more pressure off of him and enables him to be able to get big plays and make it really quick scores as opposed to like long running drives that Casey would have. Also, I'd say Casey defense does have an edge, but the real small edge is that I'd say TJ is a better runner than Casey is a passer, and if that makes any sense. That's kind of the small edge that I give TJ over Casey. And also TJ does have a Super Bowl championship, and Casey does not. So that's kind of a small little edge in their SOB careers. Also, I'd say that he has an aggressive and nightmarish defense that consistently leads the league in takeaways. What he would do a lot last year, and overall, he's just super aggressive and confusing, and he's given me problems with this, especially when we were in the same division when he was the Texans and I was the Jaguars in Madden 20, where he would just constantly be running these confusing, aggressive, nightmare defenses where they were just, guys would be running everywhere. He'd be blitzing, sending people from everywhere, changing things up. And the problem is he can give up a lot of big plays and he can get burned a lot doing that. But he has also led the league in takeaways by doing that a lot. So, and if he gets that many takeaways, it gets him wins a lot. And he's always in the playoffs, and he's always in these deep playoff runs, and he's always in the mix. But it's tough with this type of formula to be able to win those big games consistently. And also, he's decent at adapting moderately when he needs to, but not great. So, like, I would put that as a weakness for a lot of other people for adapting, but I put it as a strength for him because he's better at adapting than they are. And he can also do more things. He's more versatile. So if he needs to run the ball in a certain game, he might run the ball in a certain game. If he needs to pass the ball in a certain game, he might pass the ball in a certain game. If he wants to not blitz that game, he won't blitz that game. If he wants to blitz more, zone blitz more, he will. If he wants to play more man, he will. He'll double a guy if he has to. So he's just much more willing to adapt. He's better at it than anyone that we've named really so far because he's more well-rounded in his gameplay than everyone else. But we'll get into notable weaknesses. He is turnover prone. He turns the ball over too much, and that's what has him this low, honestly. He could very well be higher, but his turnover rate is too high against people that he can't turn the ball over against. He'll just turn the ball over and turn the ball over and turn the ball over, and you just can't do that. You can't turn the ball over that much if you want to win that many big games. He collapses in big games often. He's done this. He's gotten beaten badly in big games a lot. He did have one really good run, and he's beaten top level users such as myself in the playoffs before. So it's not that he can't. It's just that in big games he gets beaten badly enough times to where it sticks out in people's minds. And the defense can be too aggressive at times. It can be too aggressive, similar to Black, how we talked about him at number 10. You can kind of see, okay, it's going to be really aggressive, so I'm going to have chances for big plays. If he gives me this look, I'm going to have a chance to get a big play this way. I would do it a lot and see it a lot on film in a lot of different ways. And also, he can rely too much on the big play, which leads to those turnovers. He can rely too much on the big plays that he gets with those elite players that he'll build, and it can kind of hurt him, and he's less willing to be patient and take his time, and it kind of hurts him in a lot of different ways. So number 6, this is the start of tier 2. I expect the people in this tier to at least appear in one Super Bowl. And this doesn't mean that they can't exceed it, or I believe that they won't. But at the very worst, I expect these guys to make a Super Bowl. Number 6, I have X, or Xavier. Notable strengths for him: he's an elite team builder, probably the best team builder that I've named so far. And like I said, I would keep saying this. It's either him, probably TJ or Casey, are all in the mix in terms of team building, are right there with each other. But because of Xavier's success last Madden and his ability to consistently kind of form these like super team rosters, I give him the slight edge over both of them. He's great at adapting. He can really truly adapt, not within a game. He's not great at adapting within specific games. So if he's fine at it, but he's not great. So if something's not working for him in a game, he can switch, but it isn't phenomenal, but it's there. And he is great at adapting from a different game. So if he watches a game from earlier in the season against the same opponent, and then he might go into it, the new game with a completely different plan of attack, and he might be able to, kind of completely change what he was going to do the first time. Also, traditionally, he has an elite man defensive scheme. He's had this in previous Maddens. He's had this, as far as I can remember, basically, he had some form of elite man coverage defense that gives significant problems. He probably has the second best man coverage scheme, period, in SOB, if not the best. But I'd say the second best, in my opinion. And also he can beat anyone. And this is kind of because of the combination of reasons that I have here. Because he's an elite team builder, because he's great at adapting, because he has an elite man defensive scheme. All those things together, kind of, to me, he can beat anyone. Also, I didn't put it here because, these strengths are, in my opinion, his strongest strengths, for lack of a better term. But he is also a borderline elite runner, I'd say, and he is a good passer. So all those things kind of lead up to number 6. And then we have some weaknesses. He can beat anyone, but he also can lose to anyone. And this is kind of part of it is mentality, part of it is game style, part of it is just kind of like it takes time to get rhythm with his roster. So he can beat anyone, he can lose to anyone. and that has him at number 6, as well as he usually has some sort of glaring hole in his game depending on the Madden or season. Last year, it wasn't as big as it was in previous Maddens. Like, he kind of didn't have a glaring hole, but in previous Maddens, he's kind of lacked the ability to do something, whether it was stop people in defense, whether it was run the ball, whether it was pass the ball. He always had some sort of glaring weakness or something like that, hole in his game, depending on what it was. And he's usually inconsistent. He can lose like 3 regular season games one year, 13-3, and then the next year he'll well, I guess 13-4 now because it's a 17 game season, but you get the point. And then he'll like win 10 games the next year and get blown out like 3 or 4 times. And then he'll make like a deep playoff run. So it's just like it's really like kind of all over the place. His floor is much higher, I feel, than a lot of other people, although he is kind of inconsistent in that sense. His floor is like, it's still a winning record. So his floor even is a winning record, but it's still inconsistent enough to where I feel to put it here in terms of like him getting blown out sometimes. Like in Madden 20, he was in Trell's division. He was the 49ers, Trell's was the Cardinals. Trell's would blow him out in the regular season, and then they would have occasional playoff games where Trell's and him would play close. I think he even beat him in one of them. I think only one, but yeah, I mean, you would have games sometimes where Trell's would just decimate him, and then other games where Xavier would play really close or even beat him. So that kind of inconsistency kind of is what I'm talking about. Not necessarily like inconsistent in the sense that like he'll go from worst to first, but he'll go from kind of like barely winning to top of the league type of winning. So getting into the top 5, in the middle of tier 2, we have Key. Notable strengths for Key include he's an elite runner, he's an elite defensive user, and he has elite mental warfare. I mean, he clearly gets into people's heads constantly, bothers people constantly. And it's just constantly a problem for other people when he plays them. They want to beat him so bad and they press so hard that they just kind of like implode sometimes, and you'll see it like. And the guys that don't pay attention to any of that or the chat at all are the guys that traditionally do the best against him. But the guys that pay attention to it really buy into it, and it can either bolster you or it can kind of like hurt you. And most of the time it hurts guys. And it makes them want to beat him so bad, and it just makes them press too hard, and it's such an advantage like to have that and be able to do that with regularity, and he is really good at that. Arguably, I mean, in recent memory, he's been the best because he's got onto most people's nerves, and that's something that he's done, and it's worked for him to an extent. So I guess you might as well keep going with what's working for you. That coupled with the fact that he is an elite runner. He is an elite defensive user. He did break through and win a Super Bowl last year, albeit with a phenomenal Cowboys team in the first season, but he still won, and he executed it correctly. He utilized the team properly. He was improving that team a lot. People forget. He was making that Cowboys team really good. It was going to be even better going forward, but he kind of, flamed out and left. So that Cowboys team could have been really great, but, it's kind of on him for being too emotional and too wrapped up in it in that way. And also, he's not intimidated by big names or big games. Not really very much. A little bit. He's not unflappable, but he's not as intimidated by these bigger names, bigger games. He tries to embrace those bigger games, and it has worked for him to an extent, but at the same time, he's lost in a lot of big games to a lot of people. So it's like, I mean, everyone has, but like, but the fact that he's just not necessarily super afraid of them is a big thing. So all those things together kind of are his key strengths. Notable weaknesses is his supreme arrogance that can lead to being upset in all these types of games. He just has a sense of like an aura of like supreme arrogance, and it's like you lose games that you're not supposed to lose because you believe you're supposed to win. Like, just because you believe you're supposed to win a game doesn't mean you will win the game. You have to go into the game, especially playoff games that are one game. You have to go into them with the belief that it's even. It's 50-50. Anyone has a chance. You have to give everything you got to win those playoff games, or you could very well lose to what's perceived to be an inferior team, and he has done that a lot. Like I said, he lost to D-Hat, he lost to Jeff's team in the playoffs before. He's lost to people that are just not necessarily, or at least he perceives, and the general consensus perceives them to maybe not be as good as him, but because they outplayed him in that game, he lost. And his supreme arrogance is a big thing in that. And he's also not a great passer. He's not a bad passer. He's a good passer. He's fine. But like I said, the further we get into these rankings, the more nitpicky I have to get with the weaknesses, because these guys are all, especially in the top 5, are all really good. In the top 10 in general, really good. And then you can say the final tier 1, and those guys are great. But ultimately, he's just not a great passer. He's a good passer. If you ask him to be a passing team and win the Super Bowl, it's probably not going to happen. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, but he absolutely has not done that to this point. And it's not something to do that he can do with regularity. Moving on to number 4, this is the top of tier 2. The last user before the final tier 1 in the top 3. We have Smoke. Notable strengths for Smoke. He's arguably the best runner, defensive user in SOB on a year-to-year basis. So like the elite combination of being, a top 3 runner and a top 3 defender every Madden is just like super elite, and it just puts him constantly at the top. The only Madden that he struggled, that I've been around, and he has legitimately struggled, was Madden 19, where he had a bad Bucks team, and we had the most condensed SOB that we've had, and he was finally getting that team to kind of turn a corner, and we ended with like 6 or 7 seasons. So he didn't get quite as much time as he would have hoped to be able to make a good run with that team. But every other year, he's been a Super Bowl contender without a doubt. He's been in the mix. He's been contending for Super Bowl. He's been, honestly, he's been the Giants to my Patriots. If we're making that comparison, he's been the person that if I'm in the playoffs, I want to play him the least. Me personally, I want to play Smoke the least out of anyone, because he gives me personally the most problems, and he also is good enough and versatile enough to give other people problems as well. He's also elite at adapting. He's the first person I'd call elite at adapting. I called Xavier good at it, like really good at adapting, especially really good in out of games, but within games he's just fine. Smoke is just all around elite at adapting. He can completely change his game in the middle of the game enough, especially defensively, where it's just like a completely different thing, or it feels like a completely different thing. Maybe it's just a couple subtle changes, but it feels completely different, and it's just like, wow, like I felt like, he was running one thing and now he's running something completely different. Now it's super hard for me to attack this the same way, so I have to go ahead and try to do other stuff. And sometimes it's worked, but sometimes it hasn't. So he's one of the best team builders. He is an elite team builder. He's top 3 probably team building in totality. And he's absolutely unflappable. He doesn't let any of that talk bother him. Like I talked about guys, I named a few guys, a handful of guys who I say, those big games and big names don't intimidate them as much, but he is unflappable. They don't bother him at all. He plays everyone like they're just a regular game pretty much, and he understands the moment. It's not that he doesn't understand it; it just doesn't bother him, and that's something that is just super valuable and allows him to literally have a really good chance at beating anyone, like absolutely anyone. And he is one of the best game planners. I talked about his ability to adapt is elite. But his initial game plans are also traditionally very elite. And it's hard to, kind of figure those out. I would go into games against Smoke thinking I knew what he was going to do and thinking to know how I'd attack it. And then he would come in with something completely different. And I just would be like completely, I would just be stumped for like a while. And there would be plenty of games like that. And that's why we played so many close games and so many big games. And, it's just been a constant rivalry between he and I, and overall, he's kind of been, like I said, a Super Bowl contender. Notable weaknesses, also along, like pretty much on the same level as Key, maybe a little bit above Key as a passer. He's not a great passer. And like I said, I get more nitpicky with these the further along I go. but he's not a great passer. He's a good passer. He's not great. He can also take a while in each Madden to find a rhythm. And this is kind of because of the teams he started with. Last year was the only year I think in recent memory or at all that he started with a really good team. In Madden 17 he had the Bengals. In Madden 18 he had the Jaguars when they were not good. In Madden 19 he had the Buccaneers. And in Madden 20 he had the Titans when they were not good. In Madden 21 he finally had a good Cardinals team. But other than that, he has not really had a very good team. And because of that, he has had slow starts to the Madden season, so he hasn't been a real true contender until about the third season or so, maybe the second season. So he kind of usually starts a little slow, and again, that's kind of nitpicky, but it's there. And he's also just not a very great passer. But other than that, checks all the boxes. He's elite in a lot of categories. He's good in a lot of categories, and truly the biggest threat, in my opinion, to myself on a consistent basis. So a lot of respect for Smoke and top of tier 2, and moving into tier 1 and the top 3. Number 3, we have Beige. Arguably could be higher, especially with the year that he had last year, but we'll kind of get into why he's number 3 as opposed to number 2 or number 1. Notable strengths for him include he's the best offensive user in SOB. I think that's clear in my opinion. Truthfully, I believe he is, including myself, I think he is the best offensive user in SOB. Not the best user, but the best offensive user. He traditionally develops virtually unstoppable schemes. He did this with his Falcons team in Madden 19, and he did this last year in Madden 21. He did this in 2 Maddens, and they were both just super hard to stop. I remember just stressing out about having to worry about all these types of different things that he would do, and all these different ways he would attack you and use his players, and it was just a lot to think about and a lot to worry about, and it's virtually unstoppable. It's not unstoppable, but it is close to unstoppable. It is very tough to stop. He has creative blitzes and defensive play calling that can stress out and confuse opposing offenses. He's kind of a better version of TJ in that way, at least defensively. Because he can kind of do a lot of what TJ does similarly, with the confusing blitzes and the nightmarish defenses, only he does it and gives up less big plays and less big, point totals. So I'd say that ultimately, the combination of being the best offensive user along with being really creative and innovative defensively, puts him at number 3. And he's also supremely elite developing players. But I wouldn't call him an elite GM in total. I would just call him supremely elite at developing players. So he might take a player in free agency that's 24 and take them as an 82 and build them to be a 93 superstar in 2 seasons. And that's something that he does better than anyone for sure. It's very Belichickian in the sense that you take this this obscure player who kind of flamed out somewhere else, and you make him into a really stud player for your team. And he's done that a lot more than anyone else, and that's what I'm talking about. He's elite at, not necessarily getting his own players to be really good. His weaknesses include he's average at drafting players, and this is the main reason why he's number 3 to me, because he's just very average in his drafts. I've been with him when he's drafted, and he has just not drafted consistently well, and also maybe he'll hit on one draft pick for whole drafts. He won't have a full good draft. He's just fine at drafting. He's okay. And the good thing about that is he can still make the best of what he got out of a draft, but he's not that great at it. He's fine at drafting. He's okay. He's average, and that's his biggest knock on him for sure. And I think that's what separates him and these other two, is that his lack of ability to kind of have a clear vision in the draft of what he wants, and having to really kind of build those players more and do more work to get those players better, is something that it separates him and these other 2 users that are ahead of him. And maybe that'll change with the way the scouting system will be different this Madden as opposed to other Maddens. But for right now, I label him as average at drafting. And sometimes he can get too wrapped up in his scheme and struggles to adapt. I'd still say he's great at adapting. I'd say he's elite at adapting. I didn't put that in the strengths, but even being elite at adapting, I am nitpicking in the sense that sometimes his scheme, like what I mean is like his scheme is borderline stoppable, but he'll like keep sticking with it even if like the user playing against him is giving him indications that they're going to be able to like they're close to figuring it out, and he'll still stick with it. And that slight amount of stubbornness has cost him in some moments, in some key moments. So that is nitpicking, but it is there. And moving to number 2, Trells at number 2. Notable strengths for Trells. He is the best user in SOB at developing players, like period. If he chooses to develop a player, they're going to be a superstar. It's guaranteed. He'll invest a season in developing a few players, and they will all be good by the end of the season, and that's really all there is to it. He has an elite cover 3 scheme that translates every Madden, literally every Madden I've been in with him. He has had an elite cover 3 scheme that has given virtually everyone problems that has played against it. It's consistent. It is elite. It is it's his bread and butter, and it is just tough. He always gets it to work, and it's always a problem for opposing defenses. He can attack on offense however he chooses. If he wants to run the ball in a game, he can run the ball in a game. If he can pass, if he wants to pass the ball in a game, he'll pass it. If he wants to be like swing passes, like he'll just create a game plan for kind of whoever he wants to develop, or if it's a playoff game, however he wants to attack the defense, and he'll just do it that way. He can just kind of do it however he wants to do it. And because of all these things, and because of that cover 3 floor, really, the floor of the cover 3 makes it very, very rare for him to be susceptible to upsets. And that's why I said at the bottom he has the highest floor in SOB, because that cover 3 against lower tier users that don't know how to play against it, they just won't beat him. They just won't. Like, it just doesn't happen, because you have to be able to beat that cover 3. You can't. You just can't beat him without having some sort of counter against it. It just doesn't happen unless he just plays absolutely awful. You just can't beat it, and that gives him the highest floor in SOB, because from a game-to-game basis, because you just have to be able to beat that, and not a lot of people can. So it makes him very hard to be upset within a game. Notable weaknesses. His cover 3 scheme is not a weakness, but what I put it here because it is elite, but it is very predictable, and it can be taken advantage of by users that know how. And that's a very specific set of users. Like, there's not a lot of users who can take advantage of his cover 3, but I've done it myself in many different games, and because I know the cover 3 is coming, and I know what it looks like, and I know where he wants to be, I can attack it very specifically. I can form a game plan for it very carefully, and I can attack it with precision and regularity. And that type of like predictability of that cover 3, knowing it's coming, is kind of his only weakness within kind of game plan, like gameplay wise, like in terms of just specific game planning and whatnot, because you know that's coming. So it's like, and then his offensive play calling isn't supremely diverse. It is diverse, but it isn't like wide open. It's just, it's a lot of stuff, but it's not that much stuff. Like you can kind of watch a whole season if you're playing him in the playoffs, and you know what you're going to get in the playoff game if you watch a lot of games, as opposed to other people who might come in and have some new stuff in the playoffs. But like I said, those are very nitpicky, like these kind of all are. And the cover 3 scheme, like I said, it is an absolute strength, but it can be taken advantage of by people who know how to take advantage of it. But moving on to the final spot, number 1, console, and this is, I assume, going to be controversial because he hasn't played really Madden since Madden 19 in SOB. But this is a list based off kind of my confidence, previous Maddens, information that we have gathered. In every Madden he's been in, he's been a clear, true threat to win the Super Bowl every single season, literally every single season that he's in it. It doesn't matter what team he has. It doesn't matter, kind of like who's in his division. Doesn't matter who's in his conference. He's going to have a chance to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. And that's tier 1. If I haven't clarified, I expect these 3 people, these 3 users, Console, Trells, and Beige, to win at least one Super Bowl. I expect all 3 of them to do that. I'm pretty confident saying that. And I'm not going to be surprised if all of them win more than one, honestly. But getting into his strengths, he's the best overall GM in SOB. There are rules created to prevent people from doing some of the things that he did. Not that they're cheating, but that they were so, they just enabled him to be so dominant in Madden 17 because of all these, very sneaky, high IQ GM moves that he would do. There are rules to prevent those type of things now. He's good at figuring out what's the best thing to improve his roster, what he can do. He's the best at drafting players. He can figure out, okay, I have 2 first-round picks. This is what I need. This positional value is better than this, so I'm going to go for this player. And I feel like I shouldn't target this player because I can kind of develop a 7th-round pick like this. So he's the best at drafting players. He's an elite runner. He's an elite defensive user. He's very willing and able to adapt. He's elite at adapting, depending on each opponent. And he's best at finding and cultivating players with speed and using it. So similar to Blagamuncha, like we said at number 10, he is the best version of that in the sense that he finds speed, he develops speed, he uses it correctly. He does it on offense, he does it on defense, he does it the best. All these things are ridiculous, strong strengths. All of them together kind of put him as number 1 spot. But we'll talk about his few weaknesses and it kind of nitpicking a little bit. He's a good, not great passer. He said about a lot of people. He is borderline great. He has been great at times. But the last time that I saw him play, he was a good, not a great passer. I would not put him in a top 3 passing, which is a great elite passer, going into this Madden. So this kind of nitpicking. He can be a great passer. He can be an elite passer. Wouldn't be surprised if he surprises, or wouldn't be surprised if he does become an elite passer this Madden. And he sometimes lacks a consistent counter punch if his scheme is getting beat. And that's again very nitpicky because he is elite at adapting, but I mean specifically kind of offensively, if his scheme is getting stopped, sometimes he sticks with it a little too long, similar to what I said with Beige. They'll stick with it a little too long, and it'll be too late by the time they flip and switch. It is not that they're not able to, it's that it's kind of the mindset of, I'm going to do this, and you're not going to stop me, and eventually it's going to work. And all that together kind of puts him at number 1, and that's pretty much it. That's 32 through 1. That's everyone in SOB. Those are the reasons why I have them where I have them. And that's everyone I have pretty much for SOB. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can hit me up in the app. I'll hang around for that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you guys for hanging around, and I'll post the full list too. When this, I'll do it right now. Mine as well, huh? Post the full list. So that's the full list of what the draft order is likely going to be, and that's my confidence about everyone of how well they're going to do in Madden 22. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for everyone for hanging around, and good luck this year.